Good day. Thank you so much for tuning into my show, Through the Storm, a show about finding hope in God while weathering the storms of life. My name is Chantelle Johnson, and I will be your host for the evening. I am the owner and clinical director for Soul Care Christian Counseling, located in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I have a very special and awesome guest, Miss Donna L. Reed, and she is going to be sharing a powerful story about how she has been able to weather not just one storm of life, but a number of storms of life. And she is also, I'll let her introduce herself, but I wanted to just show you a copy of her book called Life is a Puzzle Until You Find the Missing Pieces. And it's just an awesome testimony that she has. I met her about a month or two ago, and I just heard a little bit of her story, and it's just the epitome of what this show is about. And I do believe and I know that you'll be encouraged as you listen to her story and her testimony and just how God has just brought her full circle in her life. Thank you, Donna, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm going to let you just kind of jump in because I know you are a very vibrant and energetic person, and I'll let you introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Okay, not at all. And you stop me when I need to, and any questions you have, you just,
okay,
because I'll just flow.
All right, not a problem. Okay. Not a problem.
So my name is Donna Reed, as she said, and I go by Donna Lee Reed for branding, but that's good too. I want you to see me on Facebook and some other places as well, because that's one of the areas that I use to encourage young people and women, a lot of women. And life is a puzzle until you find the missing piece. That missing piece was the Lord for me. Amen. And so along the journey of some things that I went through, I realized that it was His footprints in the sand and not mine. Amen. But for many, many years, I thought it was my footprints. And what I mean by that is, I've told the story many times. I was at birth, I was left in the hospital by my biological mother, and she was unable to take me home due to some personal things at her home. Okay. And so I was placed in a lot of Caucasian homes until they found out that I was not Caucasian. Oh, wow. And so I ended up in an orphanage. Okay. And then that's where my mother came. When I say mother, my mother who raised me, that's where she found me. And when she did, she called my father. She said it took one look. And she called my father and said, Freddie, we're about to have a little girl. Oh, wow. And the interesting thing is when they did bring me to the house, I looked just like my father. So my whole growing up, my mother used to say, Freddie, I swear I don't know how you slipped this one in on me. But you did, because I literally looked just like him.
That is amazing.
And I was daddy's little girl. There's no question about that. So I had my mother, I had my father. I did not want or need anything in life. I had everything that a person could imagine. So I didn't know what it was to not have.
And let me ask you one quick question. How old were you when you found your parents?
Yeah, 2 years old when they got me from an orphanage. Okay. And so had a wonderful upbringing. Again, it was nothing that I could even imagine had wanted, because but we did face a lot of prejudice. We grew up in a predominantly white community. My mother was a civil rights leader, and so therefore, this was in the 50s and the 60s. Okay. Therefore, while she's teaching us Black history and we're going to an all-white school, that was a challenge.
That sounds like.
And so we faced quite a bit of prejudice, as And then by me being, I was biracial. By me being biracial, they thought I had the issues, because you're in a white school, white community, right. And then you're coming in with all this Black history stuff. Well, my mother taught me how to stand strong. Okay. She taught me how to look eye to eye with whoever I'm speaking with, and she always taught me to be successful and to keep my head up. So that's all I ever knew. Okay. And she also taught me I could be and do anything I set my mind to it. So if my mind was set to it, that was all I needed. Well, of course, to learn later on that the enemy would be the one to try to attack your mind. Yeah. And so what happened with me was at 18 years old, I thought I was grown, like most young people. Most of it. Yeah. And so I was leaving home, and I told my parents, I'm going to leave home, I'm grown, had 2 jobs, a car, bank account, I was good. Oh, wow. And But my parents thought I was going to go around the corner, come back home in a couple weeks when I discovered life.
Oh, right, okay.
But instead, I went 1,000 miles away from Hartford, Connecticut to Beaufort, South Carolina.
Wow.
When I got there, I called home. Now, they didn't know where I was going. That was the thing.
Tell them?
Yeah, we kind of had a little outsee,
Okay.
My parents were kind of checking on me, and I was 18, thought I was grown, my father was checking up on me, and I said, you know what? I said to my sister, I'm leaving. And my mother overheard me, she said, you don't like it, pack.
Okay.
So, I did the
You called your bluff, okay.
Yeah. And so I went 1,000 miles away. So I called home like the normal thing and said, Mommy, I made it.
Okay.
And when I called collect, of course, she said, in the 40 years I've been married to your father, I never seen him cry until you walked out that door. So since you think you're so grown, you go ahead and figure out life for yourself. And she hung up on me.
How did that feel?
And so that was a defining moment in my life, because all my life I knew, my situation. However, I never felt that situation until that day. So I knew what it was like to be 18 years old in the world by myself. Mm-hmm. And so it was the first time I understood what it meant to be like a foster child in the world by myself. I never knew foster, adoption. I never felt that because I had mommy and daddy.
Right.
But now I had nothing to fall back on, nothing to fall forward to. Mm-hmm. If anything went wrong, it was me and myself. Right. Well, my parents were only mad for a couple of hours, but I didn't know that. Okay. And so I had to figure it out for myself. And that was one of the first hurdles in life that I was afraid. So I stood in that telephone booth and I cried and I held on to the receiver, afraid to hang up. And then I realized I have to hang up. Life is waiting on me and I've got to step outside this door.
Wow. And that's huge. I mean, to go through, to be in an orphanage originally, to find parents, grow up with a basically very good life. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you grew up in the North. Is that
yes,
correct?
In Connecticut.
Okay. Yes. And so growing up, during the civil rights movement and learning the strengths of, who you are and identity and everything. And then to get to 18 and feel like, it's time for you to move on and go and be out on your own.
Yes.
And at that point you felt alone.
Oh, I was alone.
When you left home, were you going with someone, or you just picked a place on the map? How did you end up leaving?
Good question. No, we used to go vacation in Beaufort, South Carolina every year because my father was from there.
Okay.
And then there was a military base. It was Paris Island and all of that. Oh. So we were on vacation, and I saw all these young people my age out on their own, and that looked really good to me.
Fun.
So I thought, well, I'm grown, I'm smart, I have a bank account, I've got a car, I've got all of this. I'm out.
Okay.
But like I said, when I got there and realized, okay, I'm out here, but I knew I could call home to mommy at any point in time. But now, So anyway, I was 18 years old. 5 days before I turned 19, I got married. And I got married because I met this guy. He was funny. We were having a good time. We knew each other for a few weeks.
A few weeks?
Yes, a few weeks.
Okay. It's like that sometimes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I went off to Job Corps. So when I got into Job Corps, I discovered that Job Corps wasn't what I thought it was either. I thought it was advancing my knowledge and my education and getting paid at the same time. That was the picture that was painted. Right. It wasn't like that at all. So I had to escape from Job Corps, literally. And he helped me escape. And so I went back to Beaufort. And, I wanted my parents to know that everything was okay. We were talking and everything. So him and I began to talk. Okay. And my parents, when they found out I was back in Beaufort, they were like, no, listen, why don't you just get your stuff and come on back home? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not what I really wanted to do. Okay. So him and I had a talk, and he said, why don't we get married? Hey, that sounds like the smart 18-year-old thing to do.
Right.
So I said, yeah, And so we went and told my parents, all proud and everything, hey, we're going to get married. So my mother said, Donna, you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. She said, now you're 18 years old. She said, you don't have to make that decision. I said, oh, no, Mommy, I want to do this. I want to do this. He loves me.
That's right.
And so she said, well, I tell you what. If you're going to plan on getting married and you're going to do this anyway, because she knew I was headstrong, she said, if he ever does anything that harms you, ever puts his hands on you, or anything like that, she said, take it as long as you want to take it, and then don't take it any longer. Because my mother knew I wasn't one that was going to take that kind of mess.
So much.
So, and she knew it. Yeah. Well, we got married, And at 19, I was pregnant. 20, my first baby. 21, my second. 22, my third. 23, I was a single parent.
Wow.
He was very abusive. He didn't know anything about being a husband. I didn't know anything about being a wife, but I knew one thing. Your hands on me weren't equaling out.
Right.
And he was beating me up literally on a daily basis. If he wasn't beating me up physically, he was beating me down emotionally. And so I didn't know anything about divorce. I had never seen it. I had never seen my parents around it or anything like that. So I didn't know what that looked like. And I'm thinking it's the family unit. It's, you know, it's way back when. So I didn't know I had the option of leaving. But I also knew if I stayed, my kids were going to end up in a one-parent home because one of us wasn't going to make it.
Okay, okay.
And so I remember one day I was standing at the sink. I was washing dishes. It was 5 years and 3 kids later. I actually had, he was in the military. I had 3 babies in 2 years in 3 different states.
Wow.
Yeah, calculate. I know they're calculating.
Mm-hmm.
3 babies, 2 years, 3 different states.
That's a lot.
They were back to back to back.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of stress there.
That was a lot of stress there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm thousands of miles away from home.
Your family.
And because now we had lived from South Carolina to Tennessee, now Texas. And I remember one day I was standing washing the dishes, and my mother's words came back to me. Donna, if he ever puts his hands on you, take it as long as you want to take it, and don't take it anymore. And I say that to anybody who is listening and watching this show. Don't take it. You don't have to.
Yes.
You don't deserve it. Don't take it.
You have a choice.
You have a choice. And at that point, as my tears just hit that water while I was washing dishes, I said, I don't want to take this anymore. And I had 3 little ones, 9 months, 1 and 2. Yes. And I said, I'm out of here. And I began to plot and I began to plan. And it took me 9 months to plot and plan to get away from him.
Did you have any supports during the time? How did you know what to do?
Well, I was afraid to tell my parents because you don't want to think of that failure. I was afraid to tell the neighbors or anybody like that because he had this picture painted of everybody else. But I'm going to tell you what happened. I really want any woman out there that's being abused to know what happened. So he would beat me up and I would wear turtlenecks to hide it. And I remember one day I said, this is enough. I said, I'm not wearing another turtleneck. And he looked at me. And he didn't make the connection. I said, I'm about to expose you. Because I realized I was protecting him and he was beating me up. And I took off the turtleneck. And I said, this is what you want to do. Everybody needs to see it.
Wow. Wow.
And that's when he stopped really trying to put the marks. But he was still, and the damage was already done. But I knew I was out of there. I ended up on welfare. Now, mind you, he didn't know it, and nobody else knew it. I went to the system. This is, how long is this? This has been almost 40 years ago now, so don't y'all try to come after me. I had to get out of there.
Right. Yes, what you got to do.
I'm not going to tell you what state I was in. Okay.
That's right.
I went and got on welfare, and I began to save the check.
Okay.
And when he gave me money for food, I used the food stamps, and I just began to tuck all that money so that I could get away from him.
That was wise.
And it was so bad that one day the clock, I looked at the clock, it was 20 after 12, but I thought it was 4 o'clock. And my body used to tremble every day around 4 o'clock because that's what time he got off. And my body began to tremble because I was just in fear. And then I looked at the clock again and I said, it's 20 after 12. And that's when I said, I got to get out of here.
It's time to go here.
And so I took the money away and I began to plot and plan. We lived on military housing. I couldn't get anybody to believe the story whenever I would have, because I would call the MPs all the time. But everybody jumped on my case. Well, this one particular day, he came, to the house, and he had come home, and I had begun to pack boxes. And he said, what are you doing? I said, we just got kicked off a military base because of how many times I called the MPs. I said, you can blame me all you want to, but we got to move. And so then, thank God he didn't check into it.
Okay.
And I began to pack the boxes. And then I decided, because I knew I was going back to Connecticut, I decided to have a going away party. But he thought it was just a moving off base party.
Oh, I see.
And so I called all our friends and said, we're getting ready to move. We got to move off base and all of this. had the party, had the boxes packed up and everything. And he always trusted me to go find the next location we would live in.
Okay.
So I told him, we had a couple more weeks and we'd be going. But what he didn't know was, a couple of days after that party, which, by the way, he held me hostage at, after the party was over, everybody left, he pulled a knife out on me and made me sit for about 5 hours. Now, I'm going to tell this story. Again, it's been almost 40 years. Like, it's been 7 years. Okay. That night, I had spiked some punch with some pure grain alcohol, spiked the fruit. And we didn't let anybody eat the fruit, just the punch. They drank the punch. Well, while he was sitting there, I kept feeding him the fruit. And he passed out, and I dragged him out of that house and called the MPs.
Wow.
And I said, he's got to go. He's been here. And I told him what he did. They didn't believe me. And so 2 days later, he came back to the house. And the next day when he got up to leave, that day, if he had just looked in the rearview mirror, he would have saw the neighbors coming over to help me get out of there. By the time he got home from work, I had a garbage bag. And I had the keys and a note. And I was gone.
You was out.
And I drove me and my babies. I wrote that chapter is 3 babies in a truck. Drove my babies back to Connecticut.
Wow.
Now here's the interesting thing. I wanted to tell that story because it does take time. It takes time to plot and plan. Because some people, you tell them you're gone, they're going to do.
Yes.
They might do something to you.
Right, you never know.
In his case, he had this funny feeling. He just didn't know what that feeling was. And so he pulled that knife and he sat there for about 5 hours until he passed out.
Yeah, because they always say, like, if you're in that type of situation when you're thinking about leaving, if they know that you're going to leave, the violence usually kind of intensifies and turns up a notch. So that was really a lot of wisdom you had.
And I want you to hear this because I didn't know the Lord during those times. But I was praying that night. And I just said, God, just get me out of here. Just get me out of here. And that was just one of those, just those instincts to just pray.
Okay.
And so,
I'm going to just ask you if you can hold that thought for one moment.
Yes.
We're going to take a short break.
Okay.
And when we come back, I would love to hear the rest of the story.
Absolutely.
And we'll have to take a break and we'll be right back. And we're back. And we have a special guest here, Miss Donna Lee Reed, who is sharing a powerful testimony of a storm that included some domestic violence issues and how she was able to get out of that situation. And you just started to kind of tell us where the story kind of took a turn, a major turn.
So I drove back to Connecticut with my girls, with my babies. He didn't know where I was going, and I had such a head start on him, I wasn't even worried about it. At that point, I just knew there was freedom. And I just stopped at hotels on the way up the road. It took 11 days to just drive back to, to Connecticut, and they literally were babies on the front seat. But when I got back to Connecticut, I got back to find out that my mother had, after I got back, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So then I realized why I ended up going back to Connecticut, because I didn't really want to go back there, but she wanted me to come back. She said, you're going to need help with, with the babies.
Yes.
But I got back to discover that she had Alzheimer's. And so now the woman who had been there for me and the woman who gave me an opportunity in life now needed me.
Wow.
And so I took care of my mother for about 2 years. And during those 2 years, I was discovering that I'm taking care of these kids. I had to get on welfare again. I was very embarrassed by that. I hid it. I just began to, do things so that people did not know I was on welfare. And I began to do handcrafts. And I used to do crafts during the week. I went to college during the week because I didn't have my education. I had left. Well, I had a high school education, but now I wanted a college education. So I was going to college. I was doing handcrafts during the week, and then on the weekends is when I would do craft shows.
Oh, wow.
So my father used to come to every craft show, and he used to bring me and the girls, food and things like that. And my kids were literally under the table, and I was conducting business on top of the table.
Wow.
So people thought that's what I did for a living. But now I had them, I had the business, and then I had my mother. But I didn't have anybody else. I didn't have anything or anybody to turn to. So I began to drink. I began to drink a little here, a little there, just to comfort.
Yeah.
And then one day I woke up and that bottle had more control over me than I did over it. And so after taking care of my mother for about 2 years, we ended up having to put her in a nursing home. Took care of her. Then I had to take care of my father.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, because like in hearing your story and going through all of that, I'm just, sitting here thinking you're an amazingly strong person to be able to, come up with all those ideas of how to move, how to put everything into place, actually moving, taking care of kids, taking care of your mom, trying to take care of yourself, starting a business. Like, what, I guess, strengths were you pulling from?
You know what? It was determination. Okay. I was determined. My mother taught me to be successful, and I was determined to be just that. Okay. And then here was now a woman who I've seen do everything in the world, travel the world, do everything in the world. And now this doctor was telling me she was going to lose her memory. And I just couldn't wrap my head around that because Alzheimer was very, very new at the time. Okay. And I couldn't wrap my head around that. But there was one thing I did know. I was determined to be successful. And I was determined that nothing was going to beat me because that's how I was raised. Okay. And so now my father needed me. And so my mother was in the convalescent home or nursing home. And now my father needed me and the kids still needed me and I was still turned into a bottle. Okay. And so I remember one day that I began to realize that if there was nothing else, my kids needed to be in church. Okay. And so I said, well, I didn't think I did, but I felt like they did. Okay. And so I began to take them to church. And I remember one day I was sitting there and the preacher, and I tell the story in here, a lot of people laugh about it. When I first started going to church, basically it was for them. And to hear the music, because I love the music.
Good music, okay.
Good.
That's important.
Gospel music. And so I would go for the music. And I remember this one day, I would finish my list, because I would do my little list while I was in church and all this stuff while he was talking. And I was waiting for him to say one thing, the doors of the church open so I could leave. Because I thought that was my way out. Right. And so I'm sitting there, I'm doing my list this one day, and he was taking so long. And I was like, oh my God, how long can the man talk? I'm going to finish all my stuff in a week, he's still talking. And so then finally, he said, and you need to have this relationship with Jesus Christ. I said, what? Because when the doors of the church were open, see, I thought that was the exit
like time to
for
go.
me.
Yes.
So I always knew when he would wind up, I'd pack up. And when he would say that, I'd go.
Right, right.
And this one particular day, he just went on and on and on. And then when he said that, I said, a relationship with Jesus Christ. Like it's not enough to just be in church.
Just be in church, yeah.
So that was the day I went and I joined. Because I was just going. I didn't join. Okay. And I went. And it was an interesting thing because they were telling me what time church started. I always got there in time for the music. I didn't know church started like an hour before. And so when I got there, I heard all the rest of the things that went along, with church. And so, and God has a great sense of humor. Everybody, yes, you better know that.
He does.
He's not going to leave you in nothing you shouldn't be in. So get out. And he's going to have a great sense of humor when you start to tell your testimony.
Yes, he does.
And so I was going to church, and then I would always go to choir rehearsal because I had my kids in choir rehearsal. And so one day, the choir rehearsal director, he called me up front. This was after several months. He said, come up here. He said, what's your name? And I said, Donna Reed. And he said, everybody, this is Donna Reed. She's the newest member of our choir. I said, what? Because I knew I couldn't sing. And I said, what? And then I looked, there was a lot of them, so I could hide in between there.
Yeah, just lip sync.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think they had this thing, just say peanut butter, if you don't know the word.
Okay.
So, yeah,
spaghetti.
Yeah, I was like, spaghetti? Yeah, good thing I'm not on the hot choir anymore. So, I did the peanut butter whenever I needed to, Well, anyway, he told me when the first rehearsal was, and I went to the first rehearsal, and nobody was there. And I was like, well, there's only a few people here, and there's like 100 people in the choir, there's only like 15 people. So we stayed for that rehearsal for about 30 minutes, and then all of a sudden, we went to go pray, and I was like, good, we need to pray for these people. All late for the choir rehearsal.
That's right.
And then he goes, oh, everybody want to introduce you to the newest member of the praise team. What? Wow. The praise team. And that's when I realized God was putting me up front. And he began to put me up front. So when I didn't know the praise team, when I didn't know the words, because now I'm up front, I went right into praise. Lord, I just want to say thank you because I have no idea what the words are.
God knew what it was going to take.
He knew what it was going to take. And then he began to put me up front and I began to get involved in that kind of thing. But the day I really, really understood my relationship with him was the day that I said to my father, I said, Daddy, I said, listen, I need you to come and I need you to come and stay with me, because this is going to be a lot. I was going from my house. Oh, I had been working and everything for years at that point. But I had been going to my father's house every day and all of that, and then getting my kids, cooking dinner for him, coming back home,
Okay.
you know.
Just
and,
doing.
Yeah, and it was this big circle I was doing every day, and it was taking a toll on me. And so I said, Daddy, I need you to come and stay with me. And he was like, oh, are you kidding? You know, and they had been living, my parents had been in that house for almost 50 years at that point.
Oh, yeah, that's hard to give up that independence.
I knew it when I asked, but, you know, I tried. So then I said, well, Daddy, if you don't move with me, I'm going to move back home with you. He was like, okay, when? And I was, that's not how this was supposed to go. I had bought a house and everything at that point. I was like, oh, my God, it's not how it's supposed to go. So anyway, I said to my girls, I said, you know what, I'm just going to have to move back in with Daddy. And then we'll just rent the house out for now. They were little. They didn't care what I did. And so I began to move my stuff over to my father's house every day for about 2 months. We were coming down to the weekend that we were going to move just a final few big pieces of furniture because everything else was over there. And I made a decision, a last-minute decision, to leave my kids in the school that I was in. I mean, in the school that they were in the area where I lived, and I was just going to transport them every day. And that next morning when I got up to go ahead and get their school stuff straight, I got a phone call real early in the morning, and it was my father's neighbor, and he said, Donna, I need you to get over here. Your father's house is on fire. And I said, oh my God, I said, make sure Daddy's out. You know, I was screaming, make sure Daddy's out of there. And call 911, you know. And so I snatched my daughters. One of them wasn't even fully dressed. It was in February. Grabbed her, we ran, and we got in the car. And I'm driving. They're crying, and I'm just saying, God, please let it be a small fire. Let it be a small fire. Let it be a small fire. And I didn't think anything different, that it couldn't be, you know. And my thing was, oh God, I just hope Daddy, you know, like, you know, and I'm thinking he must have did something, you know, or, I mean, you know, you just all kind of things, right? But you never really get I was about 1.5 miles from the house when I saw the smoke up in the air, and that's when I realized how bad it was. And by the time I got to the house, there was hundreds of people outside. And I stopped the car because I could only get so far up, and I broke through the crowd of people. And I saw my nephew, and I said, Todd, where's Daddy? And he looked at me. I said, Todd, where's Daddy? And he just kept looking at me. I screamed, Todd, where's Daddy? And the police officer was standing behind him, and he shook his head. And behind him was the house that was still in gold.
Oh my God.
And he didn't get out.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was standing there, and I fell to my knees, and I screamed, no. And I felt this force pick me up and said, you have to be the strong one. And I stood up, and with strength that I never, ever knew I had.
Because I can't imagine.
I couldn't either. I couldn't either. But with strength I never knew I had. Not only was I there for my girls, not only was I there for my nephew, not only was I there for, it seemed like everybody else, God was there for me. And that was the first time in my life that I knew that it was Him carrying me and not me. It was that moment that I knew it was Him, His footprints in the sand and not mine. Because I always thought Donna had to be the one. And then it was shortly after that, I stopped making crafts. I stopped doing all of that because I couldn't picture it. Daddy came to every craft show. He was there. He used to come over when I made the crafts. And he, Donna, girl, what you making today? You know. So I couldn't even imagine getting back into them. And a couple of months later, I remember one day I was sitting, and it was like I heard my father's voice just as good as you hear mine now. And he said, Donna, how could you stop doing the thing I love so much and blame me for it? And I thought, oh my God. And it was at that point that not only did I start doing the crafts, but I went full-time and started my business full-time.
Wow.
And I stepped out on faith from the job that I was on, and I said, I got to do it. And then it was shortly after that, I was at church one day, because one thing about it, I was crazy enough to believe anything I heard that God said, anything that I read in the Bible, anything. I was just crazy enough to believe it, especially after that encounter with Him.
Wow.
And so I remember clearly one day, I said, God, you said that I could cast my cares upon you. You said that you would take it. God, I heard that you're a deliverer, that you would deliver and set free. And at that point, I asked Him to take the cigarettes and the alcohol that I had smoked and drank for 20 years from me. In the very hour that I asked Him, He delivered and set me free.
Amen.
Delivered and set me free. And that day, this woman said to me, she said, God knew all the time. You hid it from many, but God knew it the whole time. He was just waiting for you to give it to him.
Amen.
And she said, your testimony will impact multitudes.
Yes, it will.
And I said, well, amen.
Amen.
And to God be the glory. God took care of my parents. He took care of me, took care of my girls. He delivered. He set me free. And to this day, I share my testimony. And for any woman I know going through anything, I'm there.
Amen.
I'm
Amen.
there.
And yes, you are there. And that is just an amazing testimony. And I wish we had more time to hear more, because just hearing that, I have a lot of questions that I would love to have, So hopefully you'll come back another time. But to find God in that moment and to really experience Him the way that you did in that moment. I can't think of, that's not something that we would run to or gravitate or want or ever desire to happen.
Right.
But it sounds like God used that moment in a powerful way for you, and is still using that moment.
Yes, He is.
And I know that there's some wonderful things that you're doing even now.
Yes.
That I would love to hear about and talk a little bit more about. We're running out of time.
Okay.
And I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much, Donna Lee Reed, for being on here and for sharing, that portion of your testimony. My heart goes out for all the things that you've gone through, but it sounds like God, what the enemy meant for evil, God has turned it around for good.
Absolutely.
And I know that there's some amazing things that you're doing now, even working with children and women that hopefully will come back and talk to us about a little bit more.
Yes.
But I want to thank you all for listening in today to another episode of Through the Storm. And the show comes out on Tuesdays, every Tuesdays on the Wake Up Call TV and radio network. And thank you again, Donna, for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. And till we meet again, be blessed. And we'll be back next Tuesday. Thank you.